The stone floor was always cold, even in summer. I'd learned that during my first week scrubbing the manor's endless hallways, my knees pressing into the unforgiving granite until they bruised purple and yellow. Now, 3 months later, my body had adapted. The cold was just another constant, like hunger, or the way Mrs. Harrow's voice could slice through a room. "Celeste, the library needs dusting before the magistrate arrives." I straightened too quickly, and my lower back protested with a sharp pull. 23 years old, and already my body moved like something twice that age. The bucket of gray water sloshed as I stood, and I caught it before it could spill across the foyer's marble. Mrs. Harrow would have my wages docked for that. Again. "Yes, ma'am." The words came automatically, smooth and empty. She didn't look at me. None of them ever really did. I was part of the architecture here at Thornwick Manor, as unremarkable as the sconces or the faded tapestries depicting battles I didn't understand. My hair, pale as winter wheat, was always tucked beneath a gray cap. My dress was the same colorless fabric as every other servant's. We were meant to disappear. The magistrate's visit had everyone on edge. Lord Ashford, the master of Thornwick, had been increasingly paranoid these last weeks. New locks on doors that had never been locked before, whispered conversations that stopped when servants entered rooms. And the basement. No one was allowed near the basement anymore. Not since the incident that no one would explain to someone like me. I hauled my supplies toward the library, passing through the portrait gallery where dozens of stern faces watched my progress. Ashford ancestors, all of them, their eyes following me with painted contempt. There was one portrait I always avoided looking at directly, a man with features so sharp they could have been carved from ice, his eyes a color I couldn't name. Something about that painting made my chest feel tight. The library smelled of leather and slowly rotting paper. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through windows too high for me to reach. I started with the lower shelves, working methodically, trying not to think about how my stomach had been empty since yesterday's thin soup. That's when I heard it. A sound. Low. Rhythmic. Like breathing, but wrong somehow. Too controlled, as if whoever was making it was forcing their lungs to work on command rather than instinct. I froze. Cloth suspended in midair. The sound came again, and this time I could place it, below me. Beneath the library floor, the basement. My heart started doing something complicated in my chest. We'd been explicitly forbidden. Mrs. Harrow had made that clear with her cold, precise diction. The basement is off limits to all household staff until further notice. Anyone found disobeying will be dismissed immediately and without reference. But that sound, it was so deliberate, so human. I shouldn't have cared. I should have finished my dusting and moved to the next room and kept my head down the way I'd learned to do after my parents died and left me with nothing but a talent for becoming invisible. That's what people like me did. We survived by not asking questions, not seeing things we weren't meant to see, not mattering. The breathing stopped abruptly, then came a different sound, a scraping. Metal against stone. My hands were shaking. I set down the cloth and moved toward the far corner of the library, where I knew there was a door. It was always locked, always had been, leading to what I'd been told was just storage for old furniture. But now, standing close to it, I could hear that breathing again, clearer this time, and then a voice, raw, barely human. "Please." The word hung in the air like smoke. I pressed my palm against the door. The wood was warm, impossibly warm in this cold house. My rational mind was screaming at me to walk away, to pretend I'd heard nothing, to be the good, invisible servant who kept her wages and her place. But that voice, it sounded like someone who'd forgotten what hope felt like, but was trying to remember. My fingers found the doorknob before I'd consciously decided to touch it. Locked, of course. But the lock was old, and I'd learned things over the years, small skills that came from being poor and resourceful. I pulled a hairpin from beneath my cap, my pale hair falling across my eyes. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed thunderous in the quiet library. The door swung inward, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was thick with something I couldn't identify. Not quite decay, not quite wildness, but somewhere between. And underneath it all, that breathing, now faster, as if whoever was down there had heard the door open and was trying to decide whether to hope or fear. I should have closed the door, should have walked away. Instead, I started down the stairs. Each step felt like a choice I couldn't unmake. The darkness thickened around me, swallowing the light from the library above. My hand found the rough stone wall, using it to guide me when I could no longer see. The breathing was louder now, and with it came other sounds. The clink of chains, a low growl that might have been pain or warning. My foot found the basement floor just as my eyes began adjusting to the dimness. There was a single window, set high in the wall and covered with bars, allowing only thin strips of gray light to penetrate. And there, in the center of the room, was something that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. A man, chained, but not just any man. Even in the darkness, even with his body twisted in obvious agony, there was something about him that commanded space. He was massive, not fat, but built like violence itself, all lean muscle and coiled strength. His clothes were torn, hanging from his frame in shreds. Silver chains wrapped around his wrists and ankles, attached to bolts in the floor. The metal was etched with symbols I didn't recognize, and where it touched his skin, there were burns. Angry red welts that should have been bleeding, but instead seemed to shimmer with an odd, otherworldly quality. His head lifted slowly, and I saw his face. God help me. I saw his face. It was the man from the portrait upstairs. The same sharp features, the same impossible bone structure, but where the painting had captured coldness, this version was all raw, barely contained fury. And his eyes, they weren't any color I could name. They shifted, changed, reflected light that wasn't there. He looked at me, and I felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. "You're real," he said, his voice a rasp of disuse. "I thought you might be another hallucination." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Every instinct was screaming contradictory instructions. Run, help, hide, stay. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Smart girl, you should go. Run back upstairs and forget you saw anything." But I didn't run. Instead, I found my voice, thin and trembling. "How long have you been down here?" He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. "What day is it?" "Thursday, October 12th. Something flickered across his face. Calculation, then something darker. 3 weeks, then. They've kept me here for 3 weeks. Who? But I already knew. Lord Ashford, the household staff, everyone who'd been acting so strangely. Does it matter? His chains rattled as he shifted, and I saw him wince. The silver was burning him continuously, I realized. Whatever those symbols meant, they were causing constant pain. "You should leave before they find you here." "I don't understand. That portrait upstairs, my brother commissioned it." His smile was bitter. "Before he decided I was too dangerous to let live but too useful to kill outright." Brother. Lord Ashford was his brother. The implications crashed over me. If this man was Ashford's brother, then he was. "You're the eldest," I whispered. "You're supposed to be dead. They said you died in the war. They lied." He leaned back against the wall, and I saw the exhaustion in every line of his body. "I came back changed, and my dear brother decided the family reputation was more important than blood. So here I am, the monster in the basement." I took a step closer without meaning to. "What did they do to you?" His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw something beneath the fury, something lost and desperate. "You don't want to know, but I did. For reasons I couldn't explain, I absolutely did." The sound of footsteps above made us both freeze. Heavy boots on the library floor, and then Mrs. Harrow's sharp voice. "Has anyone seen that useless girl? Celeste?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "If they found me here, go," the man said quietly. "Now. Before you become collateral damage." But I stood there, rooted, staring at this impossible man in his silver chains, and felt something shift inside my chest. Something that had been sleeping for years. maybe my whole life. "What's your name?" I asked. He blinked, as if the question surprised him, as if no one had asked him that in a very long time. "Theron," he said finally. "My name is Theron." The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear Mrs. Harrow's voice growing sharper, more insistent. I looked at Theron, at the burns on his wrists, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the way he was trying so hard to seem fierce when I could see he was barely holding himself together. And I made a choice. "I'll come back," I whispered. His expression shifted into something I couldn't read. "Don't. For your own sake, don't." But I was already moving toward the stairs, my heart pounding, knowing I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Behind me, I heard him say something so softly I almost missed it. "Thank you." Those 2 words followed me up the stairs and back into the light, where Mrs. Harrow was waiting with her cold eyes and her colder questions, and I lied to her face with a steadiness that surprised even me. I didn't sleep that night. The servants' quarters were in the attic, a long, narrow room divided by thin curtains that did nothing to muffle sound. Around me, the other maids breathed in rhythms of exhaustion, their bodies surrendering to sleep the moment they touched their straw mattresses. But I lay awake, staring at the sloped ceiling, seeing Theron's face in every shadow. The burns, the chains, the way he'd looked at me like I was something impossible. "Thank you," he'd said. For what? For stumbling into his prison? For staring at him like he was an animal in a cage? I'd done nothing to help him. Nothing except promise to return, which was perhaps the cruelest thing I could have done. Emma, the girl who slept in the space next to mine, rolled over and murmured something in her sleep. She was 16, still soft in ways I'd forgotten how to be. She believed Mrs. Harrow when the head housekeeper said we were lucky to work at Thornwick. She believed Lord Ashford was a good man, because he occasionally nodded at us in passing. I wondered what she would think if she knew what was locked in the basement. Morning came too quickly. The bell rang at 5, as it always did, and we stumbled from our beds in the gray pre-dawn. My body ached from tension, and my hands trembled as I splashed cold water on my face from the basin we all shared. In the small spotted mirror hanging on the wall, I looked like a ghost. Pale hair, pale skin, dark circles under my eyes. "You look terrible," Emma whispered as we filed down to the kitchen. "Are you sick?" "Just tired." Mrs. Harrow was waiting in the kitchen, her spine straight as a blade, her gray dress immaculate. She assigned tasks with mechanical efficiency. Emma to the bedrooms, Sarah to the dining room, me to the lower floors. Again. Always the lower floors, where the work was hardest and the supervision lightest. I should have been grateful for the lack of oversight. Instead, I felt transparent, as if Mrs. Harrow could see exactly what I was thinking. "Celeste." Her voice stopped me at the door. "Lord Ashford has requested that the library remain locked today. You'll focus on the drawing room instead." My stomach dropped. "The library is locked." Did I stutter? Her eyes were flat, emotionless. "The drawing room. Now." I nodded and left, but my mind was racing. They'd locked it. Because of me? Had they somehow known I'd gone down there? But no. If they knew, I'd already be dismissed. The drawing room was on the opposite side of the manor from the library. I worked mechanically, dusting furniture that didn't need dusting, polishing silver that already gleamed. Through the windows, I could see the grounds stretching toward the forest, acres of carefully manicured lawn giving way to wild darkness. Thornwick sat at the edge of civilization, bordering territory that belonged to something else. I'd heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Stories about things that lived in those woods. Things that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. The old women in the village would cross themselves when they spoke of it, and parents used the threat of the forest to keep children obedient. But those were just stories, weren't they? "You're thinking too loudly." I spun around, nearly dropping my polishing cloth. A man stood in the doorway, tall, well-dressed, with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lord Ashford. I'd seen him before, of course, but always from a distance. Up close, he was handsome in a careful way, every detail of his appearance managed and controlled. I dropped into a curtsy, keeping my eyes down. "My lord, I apologize. I didn't hear you enter." "Clearly." He moved into the room with the ease of someone who'd never questioned his right to occupy space. "You're new, aren't you? Or at least newer than the others." 3 months, my lord." He circled me slowly, and I felt his gaze like insects crawling across my skin. "And you're doing well? Mrs. Harrow has no complaints?" "I hope not, my lord. Hope." He laughed softly. "Such a fragile thing, hope. Easy to crush." He paused directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and cloying. "Tell me, Celeste." "It is Celeste, isn't it? Have you noticed anything unusual during your work here?" My heart hammered. "Unusual, my lord?" "Sounds. Smells. Things out of place." His voice was casual, but there was steel underneath. "This is an old house. Sometimes old houses have secrets." I kept my face carefully blank, the way I'd learned to do when my parents' landlord came looking for rent we didn't have. "I haven't noticed anything, my lord." He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet his eyes. They were nothing like Theron's. Where Theron's had been wild and shifting, Ashford's were calculated, measuring, cold in a completely human way. "Good," he said finally. "I'd hate for any of the staff to become distracted by things that don't concern them. Curiosity can be dangerous, especially for those in vulnerable positions." The threat was clear. "I understand, my lord." He smiled again, all teeth. "I'm sure you do. Carry on." He left, and I had to grip the edge of a table to keep my hands from shaking. He knew. Maybe not for certain, but he suspected. I thought about Theron down in that basement, burning slowly in his silver chains while his brother walked free through rooms filled with light and wealth. What had happened between them? What had Theron meant when he said he'd come back changed? The day crawled by. I worked through lunch, my stomach too twisted to eat. Emma tried to talk to me during our brief afternoon break, but I couldn't focus on her chatter about the handsome stable boy or the dress she was saving money to buy. All I could think about was how to get back to that basement. The opportunity came just before dinner, when Mrs. Harrow sent me to retrieve a serving platter from storage. The storage room was near the library, and the hallways were emptier during meal preparation. I moved quickly, my heart in my throat. The library door was locked, as Mrs. Harrow had said, but I had my hairpin, and my desperate, stupid determination. The lock gave way easier this time, as if it remembered me. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me, and hurried to the basement entrance. It was still unlocked from yesterday. They hadn't realized anyone had opened it. I descended into darkness again, my eyes adjusting faster this time. Theron was in the same position, slumped against the wall, but something was different. He looked worse. The burns on his wrists had spread, climbing up his forearms in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. His breathing was shallow, labored. "You came back." His voice was hoarse. "You shouldn't have." I knelt a few feet away from him, close enough to see details I'd missed before. His clothes weren't just torn, they were stained with something dark. His fingernails were cracked and bloody, as if he'd been clawing at something. And his face, despite its sharp handsomeness, was gaunt with hunger. "When did they last bring you food?" I asked. He laughed, but it turned into a cough. "They don't. That's the point. I'm supposed to weaken until I'm no longer a threat. Then Ashford will decide what to do with me. That's murder. That's pragmatism." He shifted, chains rattling. "My brother is very practical, and I am very inconvenient." I stood and moved toward him before I could second-guess myself. Up close, I could see the symbols on the chains more clearly. Ancient-looking marks that seemed to pulse with their own faint light. These burns. They're not normal. No. His eyes followed my movements with predatory focus. "Silver is problematic for people like me. People like you?" He studied me for a long moment, and I saw him weighing something. Trust, maybe. Or honesty. "Do you believe in monsters, Celeste?" The question hung between us. "I believe in cruelty," I said quietly. "I've seen enough of it." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Then believe this. I am what your village elders warn children about. I am the thing in the forest that hunts in darkness. I am the reason silver burns and wolfsbane grows at every threshold." He leaned forward as much as the chains allowed. I am a werewolf, and my brother locked me here because he fears what I could do to his carefully constructed human life. I should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except what I did, which was sink to my knees beside him and say, I don't care. His eyes widened. You should. Maybe. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the piece of bread I'd saved from breakfast. It was hard and small, but it was something. But I don't. He stared at the bread like I'd offered him diamonds. His hand moved toward it, then stopped. Why are you doing this? Because I understood what it felt like to be invisible. Because I recognized the look in his eyes. The same desperate, dying hope I'd seen in my father's face when the sickness took him and we couldn't afford medicine, because somewhere in the last 24 hours, I'd stopped being able to look away. Someone should, I said simply. His fingers closed around the bread, careful not to touch my hand. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every crumb. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. A sound from above. Footsteps in the library. We both froze. Go, Theron whispered urgently. If they find you here, I'll come back tomorrow, I interrupted. Celeste, tomorrow, I repeated, and then I was moving, racing up the stairs as quietly as I could. I emerged into the library just as the door to the hallway began to open, and I grabbed a random book from the nearest shelf, trying to look like I'd been there all along. A footman entered, looking bored. Mrs. Harrow wants you in the dining room. Of course. I clutched the book and left, my pulse hammering in my ears. That night, lying in my narrow bed, I thought about what Theron had said. Werewolf. Monster. The thing parents warned children about, but all I could see was a man burning in silver chains while his brother planned his slow death. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that I was going to do something unforgivably stupid. I was going to try to save him. The routine became dangerous in its familiarity. Every day for the next week, I found excuses to slip away. A forgotten duster. A pitcher that needed refilling. Mrs. Harrow's instructions conveniently misheard. Each time I brought something small. A heel of bread. An apple bruised enough that the kitchen staff wouldn't miss it. Once a piece of dried meat I'd pocketed during a formal dinner service. Theron never asked me to come, never thanked me after that first time. But he ate what I brought with a focus that spoke of desperation, carefully controlled. And sometimes, when I sat on the cold floor keeping him company for the few stolen minutes I could spare, he talked. Not about his imprisonment, not about his brother. Instead, he told me about the forest, about running through it at night when the moon was full, about the way the world smelled different when experienced through heightened senses, about the freedom of being something other than human. You make it sound beautiful, I said one afternoon, watching him shift positions and wince as the silver burned fresh patterns into his skin. It is. His voice was distant and terrible. Everything beautiful usually is. I'd started bringing water too, in a small flask I'd stolen from the kitchen. He drank gratefully, though I noticed his hands shook when he held it. The chains were taking their toll. He was thinner than when I'd first found him, his face more angular, his movements increasingly labored. How long can you survive like this? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Long enough for Ashford to make his decision. He handed back the empty flask. He's waiting for something. I'm not sure what. What will he do with you? Theron's smile was grim. Nothing good. But it doesn't matter. This isn't your problem, Celeste, except it was. Somewhere between the first visit and the 7th, it had become my problem. I thought about him constantly, while scrubbing floors, while serving meals, while lying awake in the dark. The image of him in those chains had burned itself into my mind more permanently than the silver burned his skin. On the 8th day, everything changed. I was in the kitchen helping prepare dinner when Lord Ashford entered. Unusual enough to make everyone stop working. He was dressed for travel, expensive coat and polished boots, and he had 2 men with him I'd never seen before. They wore the rough clothes of workers, but there was something wrong about them, something predatory in the way they moved. Mrs. Harrow, Ashford said, his voice carrying that casual authority that came from never being questioned. I'm leaving for the capital tonight. I'll be gone approximately 3 weeks. These men will be staying to handle some maintenance issues in the manor. Mrs. Harrow curtsied. Of course, my lord. Shall I prepare the guest rooms? That won't be necessary. They'll be working primarily in the lower levels. His gaze swept across the kitchen staff, landing briefly on me before moving on. The basement remains off limits to all household staff. Make sure everyone understands that clearly. Yes, my lord. He left and the 2 men followed, but one of them looked back at me, and his eyes were wrong. Too bright, too focused, like an animal sizing up prey. Emma nudged me with her elbow. Strange men, she whispered. Did you see the way they walked? Like wolves. The word sent ice down my spine. That night, I couldn't stay away. I waited until the manor settled into sleep, then crept through the darkened hallways with my heart hammering against my ribs. The library door was locked, but my hairpin made quick work of it. The basement entrance stood open. That was wrong. It was never left open. I descended the stairs slowly, every instinct screaming danger. The darkness seemed thicker tonight, almost alive. When I reached the bottom, I understood why. The 2 men from earlier were there. They stood on either side of Theron, and they'd done something to the chains, tightened them somehow, so he was stretched taut between the floor bolts, unable to move. Blood ran down his arms where the silver cut into skin. One of the men held a knife, its blade etched with the same strange symbols as the chains. Please, Theron was saying, his voice ragged. You don't have to do this. Ashford's orders, the one with the knife said. His voice was rough, accent thick. You're too strong even like this. He wants you manageable. He wants me broken. Same thing. The knife moved toward Theron's chest and I didn't think. I grabbed the first thing my hand touched, a piece of broken wood from a collapsed shelf, and ran forward screaming, Stop! Everything happened too fast. The men turned. Theron's eyes widened in horror. The one with the knife moved toward me with inhuman speed, and suddenly I was on the ground, the wood knocked from my hand, a weight pressing down on my chest. Well, the man said, his face inches from mine. Look what we found. Little servant girl playing hero. His breath smelled like raw meat. Up close, I could see his teeth were too sharp, his pupils too dilated. Whatever these men were, they weren't entirely human either. Let her go. Theron's voice was different now, deeper, vibrating with something that wasn't quite sound. She has nothing to do with this, doesn't she? The man's hand closed around my throat. Not squeezing, just holding. A threat. She's been visiting you. We smelled her. Ashford suspected someone was interfering. Of course. They'd known all along. Please. The word tore from Theron's throat. Please. I'll do whatever Ashford wants. Just let her go. The man looked back at his companion, who shrugged. Ashford didn't say anything about witnesses. Then we eliminate the problem. The hand on my throat began to tighten. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The edges of my vision started to darken, and distantly I heard Theron making sounds that weren't human, growls and snarls that seemed to shake the foundations of the manor. Then the pressure released. The man stumbled backward, clutching his arm. Something had bitten him. No. Something had torn a chunk of flesh from his forearm. I gasped for air, my vision clearing enough to see what had happened. Theron had shifted, or partially shifted. His hands were no longer hands, but something between human and animal, claws where fingernails should be. Fur sprouting along his arms despite the silver still burning him. The transformation looked agonizing. Bones cracking and reforming, skin stretching, but he'd done it anyway. Run, he snarled at me, his voice barely recognizable. Now. But the 2 men were changing too, faster than Theron, more controlled. Within seconds, they weren't men at all but wolves, massive, gray-furred, with eyes that gleamed with intelligence and malice. I couldn't run, couldn't move, could only watch as they circled Theron, who was still chained, still burning, trying to defend himself while the silver sapped his strength. One of them lunged. Theron caught it with his clawed hand, twisting, and there was a horrible snapping sound. The wolf yelped and retreated, but the other was already moving, jaws aimed at Theron's throat. I grabbed the knife the first man had dropped. It was heavy, awkward in my hand. but I didn't hesitate. I threw myself at the attacking wolf and drove the blade into its shoulder. The wolf howled and spun, and suddenly I was facing teeth and fury. Its jaws snapped inches from my face. I fell backward, the knife still embedded in its shoulder, completely defenseless. Then Theron was there. Somehow he'd pulled one hand free of the chains, silver burning through his wrist but his claws finding the wolf's throat. The sounds that followed would haunt me for the rest of my life. When it was over, both wolves lay still. One was clearly dead, the other was breathing but unconscious, slowly shifting back to human form. Blood pooled on the basement floor, dark in the dim light. Theron collapsed against the wall, his partial transformation receding. His freed hand hung at an odd angle, the wrist a mess of burned tissue and exposed bone. He was shaking violently. "You're insane," he gasped. "You could have been killed." I crawled toward him on trembling limbs. "So could you." "I'm already dying." He laughed, but it sounded like sobbing. "This just speeds it up." "No." The word came out fierce. "No. I'm getting you out of here. Celeste, I don't care what you are." I reached for the chains on his other wrist, studying the locks. They were complex, beyond what my hairpin could manage. "I don't care what Ashford says. This is wrong. It's not wrong. It's practical." His voice was getting weaker. "I'm dangerous. These men, they were right to fear me. You protected me." I looked at his ruined wrist, at the blood loss, at the way his eyes were starting to lose focus. "That's not dangerous. That's..." I couldn't finish the sentence, didn't know how to name what I was feeling. The surviving wolf man groaned, starting to stir. "The keys," Theron said weakly. "Check his pockets." Ashford gave them keys. I searched quickly, trying not to think about what I was doing, whose blood I was touching. My fingers closed around cold metal. The locks opened. The chains fell away. Theron lurched forward, free for the first time in a month, and immediately collapsed. I caught him, or tried to. He was too heavy, too large, and we both went down in a tangle of limbs. "We have to move," I said. "When Ashford finds out, he'll kill you." Theron's hand, his good hand, gripped my arm. "You understand that, don't you? You've just made yourself his enemy." I thought about my small bed in the attic, my 3 months of wages, the life I'd been building, one careful day at a time. Then I thought about spending the rest of that life knowing I'd left him here to die. "Then we run," I said. "Both of us." He stared at me like I'd suggested flying to the moon. "You don't even know me. I know enough. I'm a monster. You're a person." I pulled at his arm, trying to get him standing. He was too weak to fight me. "Now move, unless you want to die in your brother's basement." That got him moving. We staggered toward the stairs, him leaning heavily on me, both of us leaving bloody footprints. Behind us, the wolf man groaned again, louder this time. We had minutes at most before the manor erupted in chaos. "The forest," Theron muttered. "We need to reach the forest. It's my territory. I'll be stronger there." We climbed the stairs together, step by agonizing step. In the library, moonlight streamed through the windows. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the beginning of everything I couldn't take back. We made it as far as the garden before Theron collapsed completely. His weight dragged us both down into the dew-wet grass, and for a horrifying moment I thought he was dead. But then his chest rose with a shallow breath, and I realized he'd simply reached the limit of what his ravaged body could endure. "Leave me," he mumbled, eyes half closed. "Save yourself." "Absolutely not." I looked back at the manor. Lights were appearing in windows, first one, then another. Someone had discovered the bodies. We had minutes, maybe less. The forest loomed 100 yards away, a wall of darkness that seemed to pulse with its own life. I'd never been this close to it before. The household staff were forbidden from approaching after sunset, and even during daylight, there was an unspoken agreement that the forest belonged to something else. Now I understood what. I hooked my arms under Theron's shoulders and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, and my muscles screamed in protest. But fear gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Inch by inch, we moved across the lawn toward the tree line. Behind us, shouting, Mrs. Harrow's voice, shrill with alarm. Men's voices, deeper, commanding, and underneath it all, a howl that made every hair on my body stand straight up. "They're calling the pack," Theron rasped. His eyes opened, more focused now. "Ashford keeps wolves, not just those two. There are others." "How many others?" "Enough." The forest was still 50 yards away. 40. My arms were shaking, my back on fire. Theron tried to help, pushing with his legs when he could, but he was fading fast. The silver poisoning had gone deep. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why risk this for me?" I didn't have an answer that made sense. Or maybe I did, but it was too raw, too new to put into words. So instead I said, "Because no one should die alone in the dark." Something in his expression shifted. "Your parents. You watched them die." It wasn't a question. Somehow, he knew. The fever came when I was 19. The words came out clipped, focusing on pulling him forward rather than the memories. We couldn't afford medicine, or a doctor. So I held my mother's hand while she burned, and then my father's. And then I had nothing except the clothes I was wearing, and a talent for being invisible. "You're not invisible," Theron said quietly. "Not to me." I didn't know what to say to that. 30 yards to the forest, 20. A gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet hit the ground 3 feet from us, sending up a spray of dirt. I screamed and fell forward, covering Theron with my body without thinking. Another shot, this one closer. "The trees," Theron growled. He was changing again. I could feel it, his body shifting beneath mine, bones cracking and reforming. "Get to the trees." But I couldn't move fast enough. Footsteps pounding across the lawn. More howls, closer now. I looked back and saw them, 4 wolves, massive and gray, racing toward us with terrifying speed. And behind them, Lord Ashford himself, holding a rifle. "Celeste!" he shouted. "Move away from him! You're not thinking clearly." Theron's transformation accelerated. His body writhed, expanded. Where a man had been, something else was emerging, larger, darker, more powerful. His clothes tore away in shreds. The burns from the silver still marked his fur, angry red patches that hadn't healed, but his eyes were fully golden now, and fixed on the approaching threat. He rose on 4 legs, and even weakened, even poisoned, he was magnificent. A wolf the size of a small horse, black as midnight, with those impossible eyes that seemed to hold something beyond animal intelligence. The 4 wolves slowed, uncertain. They could smell the silver on him, could see his wounds, but there was something in his stance that gave them pause, something that said alpha even in his weakened state. Lord Ashford had no such hesitation. He raised the rifle again, and this time I knew the bullet would find its mark. I didn't think. Just moved. I threw myself in front of Theron, arms spread wide, my pale hair catching moonlight like a banner. "No!" Ashford's finger froze on the trigger. "You stupid girl. Move." "No." My voice was steadier than I felt. "I won't let you kill him. He's a monster." Ashford's face was twisted with something between rage and fear. "He's dangerous, unstable. He killed 2 of my men tonight after they tried to kill him." The words exploded out of me. "You locked your own brother in a basement. You tortured him. You were going to let him die." "He came back from the war changed," Ashford shouted back. "Infected. Cursed. He's not my brother anymore. He's an abomination that wears my brother's face." Behind me, Theron growled, low, threatening, vibrating through my bones. "He's still human," I said. "Part of him is still human, and that makes him more dangerous, not less." Ashford's voice dropped, became almost pleading. "Celeste, you seem like a sensible girl. You understand hierarchy, order. My brother threatens all of that. In his wolf form, he's the strongest of our bloodline. If he wanted, he could challenge every alpha in the territory. He could start a war. So you'd rather murder him? I'd rather preserve what our family has built over centuries." The rifle steady again, aimed at my chest now instead of Theron's. "Move. Last chance." The 4 wolves had crept closer during our argument. They formed a semicircle around us, cutting off any escape except into the forest behind us. In the distance, I could see more lights at the manor. More people coming. This was about to get much worse. Theron nudged me with his massive head, pushing me gently aside. When I looked at him, I saw resignation in those golden eyes. He was going to surrender, going to die to save me. Something inside me cracked open. "If you shoot," I said, meeting Ashford's gaze directly, "you'll have to shoot me first, and then you'll have to explain to every servant in that house why you murdered one of your own staff. You'll have to explain the body, the circumstances, the mysterious prisoner in your basement. Your precious reputation will be destroyed either way." Ashford's jaw clenched. "You think you're clever. I think I have nothing to lose." It was true. I had no family, no prospects, no future beyond serving in houses like this until my body gave out. But Theron, damaged, dangerous Theron, had looked at me and seen someone real. "So shoot me if you want, but I'm not moving." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tableau held. Ashford with his rifle, me with my arms spread, Theron poised behind me, the 4 wolves watching with eerie intelligence. Then one of the wolves whined, softly at first, then louder. It was looking past us, into the forest, and its ears were flat against its skull. Something was coming. I felt it before I saw it, a presence that made the air feel heavy, electric. The trees behind us began to rustle though there was no wind, and then they emerged. Wolves. Dozens of them. Pouring from the forest like shadow made flesh. They were smaller than Theron, but there were so many, and they moved with perfect coordination. They flowed around us, between us and Ashford's wolves, forming a living wall. At the front stood a gray wolf, scarred and ancient-looking. It fixed Ashford with a stare that was unmistakably hostile. "The forest pack," Ashford whispered. His rifle lowered slightly. "They never come this close to the manor." The gray wolf looked at Theron and made a sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a bark. A summons. Or maybe an acknowledgement. Theron responded with his own sound, and suddenly the gray wolf's pack was moving again, creating a corridor that led straight into the forest. An invitation. Or an escape route. "They're protecting him," I breathed. "Why?" Theron shifted back to human form, the transformation quicker this time despite his injuries. He crouched beside me, still breathing hard, his body covered in sweat and blood and the remnants of his wounds, "because I was born to lead them," he said quietly. "Before Ashford locked me away, I was becoming what they needed, what they'd been waiting for. An alpha king," Ashford said bitterly. "That's what the old bloodlines called it. A wolf strong enough to unite the packs. I couldn't let that happen." "So you'd rather have a territory divided?" Theron's voice was getting stronger. "You'd rather have the packs fighting amongst themselves while hunters grow bolder and the old territories shrink every year?" "I'd rather have control. Control is an illusion." Theron stood, helping me up with him. "The forest knows that. The wolves know that. You're the only one still clinging to the fantasy that you can manage something wild." The gray wolf barked once, sharp and commanding. The pack began to move, melting back into the trees. The message was clear. Come now. Or not at all. Theron looked at me. Really looked at me. In a way that made me feel exposed and seen and terrified and exhilarated all at once. "This is your last chance to walk away. If you come with me into that forest, there's no coming back. You won't be human anymore, not the way you were. The pack will change you. I'll change you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that to live among wolves, you have to become pack. The bond, it's..." He struggled for words. "It's permanent. Magic. You'll be tied to me, to them, for the rest of your life. You'll feel what we feel, run where we run. You'll belong to the wild." It should have terrified me, should have sent me running back to the manor, back to my small, safe life of invisibility and poverty and slow dying. Instead, I thought about my attic bed, my empty stomach, the way Mrs. Harrow looked through me like I was furniture, the years stretching ahead all the same, until I was old and used up and forgotten. Then I thought about Theron and his chains, the way he'd protected me, the look in his eyes when he said I wasn't invisible. "I choose the forest," I said. His expression transformed, surprise giving way to something fiercer, more possessive. "You don't know what you're agreeing to." "I know enough." I reached for his hand, the one that wasn't destroyed. "I know more than I did in that basement. More than I did scrubbing floors. So yes, I choose this. I choose you." Something passed between us then, not words, but something deeper. An understanding. A recognition of two people who'd both been slowly dying and had suddenly found a reason to live. "Then run," he said, and his smile was wild and beautiful, and nothing like human. "Run with me." We turned toward the forest. Behind us, Ashford was shouting, ordering his wolves to attack, but they were hesitating, confused by the forest pack's protection. We had seconds. Theron's hand gripped mine, and then we were running. The forest pack surrounded us, carrying us forward on a tide of fur and muscle and primal power. The trees swallowed us whole, and the last thing I saw of Thornwick Manor was Lord Ashford's face, twisted with impotent rage as he watched his brother disappear into the darkness. The forest closed around us like a living thing, and I didn't look back. The forest at night was nothing like I'd imagined. We ran for what felt like hours. Theron's hand locked around mine, the pack flowing around us like water. My lungs burned and my legs screamed, but every time I thought I couldn't go another step, I'd feel something, a pulse of energy that wasn't mine, coming from Theron, from the wolves surrounding us, pushing me forward. Finally, we stopped in a clearing, where moonlight pierced through the canopy in silver shafts. I collapsed immediately, gasping, while Theron bent double beside me. His injuries were still visible, the burns from the silver angry and raw. But he was healing. I could actually see it happening, tissue knitting together, though slowly, as if his body was fighting poison and recovery simultaneously. The gray wolf from earlier approached. Up close, it was even more impressive. Massive shoulders, scars crossing its muzzle, eyes that held decades of knowledge. It circled Theron once, then sat, watching him with obvious expectation. "His name is Garrick," Theron said between ragged breaths. "He's been leading this pack since before I was born. He's been waiting for me." Waiting for what? To step down. Theron looked at the old wolf with something like affection and grief mixed together. "He's tired. The pack needs younger leadership, but tradition requires a challenge, and he's too strong for any of the others to defeat, except me." I watched the way the other wolves positioned themselves, deferential to Garrick, but watching Theron with unmistakable interest. "They want you to fight him? They want me to lead." He stood slowly, still favoring his damaged wrist. "But Garrick needs to be sure I'm worthy, that I haven't been broken by what Ashford did." The old wolf stood as well, and suddenly the air felt charged. The other wolves backed away, forming a circle around the clearing. This was happening. Now. "You're still hurt," I protested. "You can barely stand." Theron smiled at me, and it was gentle despite everything. "That's the point. Leadership isn't about being the strongest when everything's perfect. It's about being strong enough when everything's broken." Then he was changing again, his body flowing into wolf form with more ease than before. The forest seemed to help him somehow, lending him strength. Within moments, the man was gone, and the massive black wolf stood in his place. Garrick circled him slowly. There was no aggression in his posture. This wasn't about dominance or anger. It was about assessment. Testing. They came together suddenly, a blur of black and gray fur. But it wasn't the vicious fight I'd expected. Instead, they moved almost like dancers, testing each other's strength and speed through controlled movements. When Garrick lunged, Theron deflected. When Theron pressed forward, Garrick gave ground and then countered. It was beautiful and terrifying. The other wolves watched in absolute silence. I realized I was holding my breath. The dance continued for minutes that felt like hours. Both wolves were breathing hard now, and I could see Theron flagging. The silver poisoning was still in his system, sapping his strength. Garrick pressed his advantage, forcing Theron back toward the edge of the circle. I wanted to interfere, to stop this, but something held me frozen. This was important in ways I couldn't fully understand. This was about more than just two wolves fighting. Then Theron did something unexpected. Instead of continuing to resist, he dropped to the ground and exposed his throat. The ultimate submission in wolf language. My heart stopped, but Garrick didn't attack. Instead, he stepped back, and I swear the old wolf was smiling. He made a sound. Approval, acknowledgement. And then he did something that made the entire pack gasp as one. He bowed. The ancient alpha bowed to Theron, lowering his great gray head until his muzzle touched the ground. One by one, every wolf in the clearing did the same, even the youngest, barely more than pups. They all bowed to the black wolf who'd shown wisdom instead of just strength. Theron shifted back to human form, and he was crying. Silent tears tracking down his face as he knelt beside Garrick and pressed his forehead to the old wolf's. "Thank you," he whispered. "I won't fail them." Garrick made a sound like a sigh, contentment, relief. And then he was changing too, becoming human for the first time since I'd seen him. He was ancient, his body mapped with scars, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "You understand," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Leadership is sacrifice. It's knowing when to fight and when to yield. Your brother never learned that." He placed a weathered hand on Theron's shoulder. "Lead them well, young king. Lead them into a future I won't live to see." "You're not dying," Theron said fiercely. "No, but I'm tired." Garrick smiled. "And now I can rest." He shifted back to wolf form and padded into the forest, several of the older wolves following. Leaving Theron standing in the center of the clearing, surrounded by his new pack, looking overwhelmed and powerful and completely lost. I went to him. The wolves parted to let me through, and when I reached him, he pulled me against his chest and held on like I was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "What happens now?" I asked against his shoulder. "Now?" He pulled back to look at me. "Now I keep my promise, the bond. It's the only way you can truly be safe here. The only way the pack will accept you as one of them. Will it hurt? Yes." He was honest at least, but it will also be extraordinary. He led me to the center of the clearing, where moonlight pooled like liquid silver. The pack formed a circle around us, watching with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. "Are you sure?" Theron asked one more time. "Once this is done, you'll never be fully human again. You'll feel the pull of the moon, the call of the hunt. You'll be bound to me in ways that go beyond marriage, beyond any human understanding of connection." I thought about the girl I'd been yesterday. Invisible, insignificant, slowly disappearing into a life of servitude. Then I thought about who I might become, part of something wild and free and dangerously alive, I'm sure. He took my hand and placed it over his heart. I could feel it beating, fast and strong. Then he placed his hand over mine, covering it completely. His eyes shifted to that impossible gold color. "The bond requires trust," he said softly. "Complete trust. You have to let me in, Celeste, all the way in. No walls, no hiding." That terrified me more than anything else. I'd spent years building walls, becoming invisible, protecting the tender parts of myself from a world that had taken everything I loved. But I'd also spent the last week visiting a prisoner in a basement, bringing him bread and water and something like hope. I'd thrown myself between him and wolves, between him and bullets, between him and his brother's hatred. I'd already chosen him. Now I just had to choose to be vulnerable. "Okay," I whispered. "I trust you." His hand pressed firmer against mine. Then he leaned forward and bit my shoulder. The pain was immediate and shocking. But before I could scream, something else flooded through me. Warmth. Power. A sense of connection so profound it felt like my soul was being rewritten. I could feel Theron, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. I could feel his relief, his fear, his desperate hope that this would work. I could feel the pack around us, dozens of individual presences that were somehow also one unified whole. And underneath it all, something ancient and wild unfurled inside my chest, something that had always been there but sleeping, waiting for permission to wake. When Theron released me, I was shaking, but not from pain, from power. "Look," he said, turning me toward a still pool of water at the clearing's edge. My reflection stared back, but changed. My eyes held a faint golden glow. My pale hair seemed to move with a life of its own, catching moonlight like it was generating it. And on my shoulder, where Theron had bitten, was a mark. Not quite a scar, more like a brand that pulsed with soft light. "You're Pack now," he said. "You're mine, and I'm yours. For as long as we both live." The wolves howled, a chorus of approval and welcome. The sound filled the forest, filled the night, filled me until I thought I might burst with it. I turned back to Theron, and he was watching me with an expression that made my breath catch. "What?" I asked. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You were always beautiful, but now I can see all of you. No more hiding. No more invisibility." He was right. I could feel it. The walls I'd built crumbling, the armor falling away. For the first time since my parents died, I felt seen. And it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The next weeks passed in a blur of learning and transformation. Theron taught me the ways of the pack, how to read the subtle communications between wolves, how to move through the forest without disturbing it, how to hunt and fight and survive. The other wolves accepted me with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some were welcoming, like a young female named Sarah, who seemed delighted to have another woman in the pack. Others were more cautious, watching me carefully to see if I would prove worthy of their new alpha's trust. Theron healed slowly, the silver poisoning working its way out of his system. The burns faded to silver scars that marked his skin like a map of his captivity. He never spoke of Ashford or the manor. But sometimes at night I'd feel his nightmares through our bond and would press closer to him, offering silent comfort. We built a life in the forest, rough and wild, and nothing like what I'd known before. We had no walls except the trees, no roof except the sky, but we had each other, and we had the pack, and somehow that was enough. Then, 5 weeks after our escape, everything changed again. I was returning from the stream with Sarah when I felt it through the bond. Theron's sudden spike of alarm. We ran back to the clearing to find him in human form, standing rigid, staring at something. A letter, pinned to a tree with a silver knife. "Don't touch it," he warned as I approached. Silver, still dangerous. But he could read it from where he stood. I watched his face cycle through shock, confusion, and something that might have been grief. "What is it?" I asked. "Ashford is dead." His voice was flat. Killed by his own wolves 3 days ago. They couldn't accept his leadership anymore. Too weak, too focused on control instead of strength. The territory is in chaos. Packs are fighting for dominance. Who sent the letter? The council. The governing body that oversees all the territories. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were bleak. "They're calling for me. They want me to come before them and accept my claim. Not just to this forest, but to the entire territory." Everything Ashford controlled, the implications crashed over me. "You'd have to leave. We'd have to leave." He took my hand. "The bond doesn't break with distance, but it strains, and you're not ready to shift yet. Traveling with the full pack through hostile territory while you're still learning. It's dangerous," I finished, "extremely." I could feel his conflict through our connection. He wanted to claim what was rightfully his, wanted to bring order to the chaos his brother had left behind, but he also wanted to keep me safe, keep the pack safe, not rush into something that could destroy everything we'd built. "What if we don't go?" I asked. "What if you refuse the claim, then someone else takes it, someone potentially worse than Ashford? And all of this," he gestured at the forest around us, "becomes vulnerable. The council could decide our pack is rogue. They could send hunters. There was no good choice, only different kinds of risk." I looked at the wolves gathered around us. At Sarah, young and eager. At Garrick, old and wise. At the dozens of others who'd accepted me, who'd become something like family. Then I looked at Theron, at the man who'd first seen me when I was invisible, who'd made me pack when I had nothing. "Then we go," I said. Together. All of us. Theron's eyes widened. Celeste. You said I'm pack now, that I'm yours, and you're mine. I squeezed his hand. That means we face things together. I didn't choose safety when I chose you. I chose this. All of it. Whatever comes. He pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. Through the bond, I felt his love like a physical force. Overwhelming, fierce, absolute. Then we go, he agreed. But carefully, intelligently. We're not rushing into this blind. The journey south took 2 weeks. We traveled mostly at night, moving through territories that were neutral or allied. Theron sent scouts ahead to map the safest routes, and we avoided confrontation wherever possible. But 3 times we encountered hostile packs, and 3 times Theron proved why the council had called for him. He didn't fight unless absolutely necessary, but when he did, it was devastating. Quick, efficient, overwhelming. Each time, the hostile wolves submitted or fled, and word spread. The Black Alpha was coming. The Alpha King was claiming his territory. I learned during that journey, learned to fight at Sarah's side, learned to read the shifting politics between packs, learned that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about knowing when to push, and when to compromise, when to show dominance, and when to show mercy. Theron taught me that through example. And through our bond, I understood the weight of leadership in ways I never could have before. We reached the council grounds on a cold morning in late November. It was a massive clearing surrounded by ancient stones. Dozens of packs already gathered. The air buzzed with tension and barely suppressed violence. The council themselves waited at the center. 7 ancient wolves in human form, their authority unquestionable. At their head stood a woman who looked carved from ice and will. Theron Ashford, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. You come to claim your brother's territory. I come to claim what is mine by birthright, Theron corrected. He stood tall, unflinching, with our pack arranged behind him. What my brother stole through treachery. Bold words. But the woman was smiling. And who is this? Her gaze fixed on me. A human? In your pack? My mate, Theron said, and I felt power flood through our bond as he said it publicly for the first time. Bonded and claimed. She is pack. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. A human mate was unusual but not unheard of. What was unusual was claiming one so openly, so defiantly. The councilwoman studied me for a long moment. Step forward, girl. I did, trying not to show how terrified I was. Up close, she smelled like winter, an old power. You chose this? She asked. Yes. Knowing what it would cost? Yes. Why? I thought about how to answer, about all the complicated reasons. Loneliness and recognition, and the slow building of something that had become love. But in the end, I kept it simple. Because he's worth it, I said. And because I was tired of being invisible, she laughed. Sharp and unexpected. Well then, let's see if your mate is worthy of his claim. What followed was brutal. 3 challenges from rival alphas, each one testing Theron's strength and will. He won all 3, though the last one left him bleeding and exhausted. When it was over, he stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by submission from wolves who would now follow him. The councilwoman approached and placed her hand on his head. Theron Ashford, the council recognizes your claim. You are Alpha of the Southern Territory, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Lead well, or we will remove you. It was done. Theron was officially king of his territory. But more than that, we were officially pack, officially recognized, no longer hiding in the forest, but standing in daylight, claiming our place in the world. That night, back at our temporary camp, Theron found me sitting alone by the fire. He lowered himself beside me with a groan, still healing from the day's fights. Regret it yet? He asked. I looked at him, at his scars, his exhaustion, the weight of leadership already visible in his eyes. Then I looked at our pack, scattered around the clearing, finally able to rest without fear. Finally safe. Not even a little, I said. He smiled and pulled me against his side. Through our bond, I felt his contentment, his relief, his deep and abiding love. "I'm glad you came to that basement," he said quietly. "I'm glad you saw me. I'm glad too." I leaned my head on his shoulder, though next time, maybe we can meet under less dramatic circumstances. He laughed, and the sound was free in a way I'd never heard before. No promises. Dramatic seems to be our style. We sat there as the fire burned down and the night settled around us, two people who'd been invisible and imprisoned finding freedom in each other. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, dangerous, full of challenges we couldn't yet imagine, but we would face them together, pack, partners. No longer hiding in basements or scrubbing floors, but claiming our place in the wild. And that, I thought, was worth every risk I'd taken, worth everything.